At this Holy Thursday Mass, one of the things that we focus on is actually an option. It's an optional part of the Mass, and that is the washing of the feet of 12 individuals representing the 12 apostles, so 12 men. It's actually an optional part of the Mass. And of course, we know that this washing of the feet symbolizes and reminds us of this attitude of service that our Lord manifested and asked his disciples to imitate. So to wash someone's feet is a humiliating task. It's a dirty task. Usually it was slaves that would wash individuals' feet. Sometimes it was the youngest member of the family, kind of showing honor to the elder members of the family. So our Lord chooses to take this task upon himself to give us an example. And this self-giving, this humiliation on his part is just a small example of the great humiliation, the great self-giving that he's going to manifest later on. And he begins to manifest this at the Last Supper. So this Last Supper, he knows it's the Last Supper that he will have with his disciples. They are actually celebrating the Passover meal. And you know, it's kind of like when somebody is dying, you know, what's their dying wish, their dying words, their dying legacy? Like, what are they going to leave to their loved ones? They know it's their last opportunity. So sometimes people have a treasure they've been holding on to, and when they're dying, they say, okay, now it's yours. So what is this dying legacy? What is this dying gift that our Lord is going to leave to his disciples and in fact to all of us? And you know, his discourse, his Last Supper discourse, which is in the Gospel of John, is very, very beautiful. And you know, he says, love one another as I have loved you. So in the example of this self-giving to an extreme degree. But our Lord gives the greatest gift conceivable. And that greatest gift is the gift of himself, God himself, who becomes truly present in the Eucharist. So our Lord himself becomes truly present in the Eucharist in sacramental form. In other words, we can't see him, we can't speak to him the way that we would as if he were standing in front of us. But he is truly present and he's truly alive in the Eucharist. He's present body, blood, soul, and divinity. So why does he want to give himself to us? Why does he want us to consume him? And it's important to note that he wants us to understand that we must consume him, that he must enter into us. In other words, in some of the other sacraments, for example, in baptism, it's not so clear that God enters into us, that the grace of God enters into us. But in the Eucharist, it's very, very clear. He wants to make this clear. You know, sometimes I ask young children who are preparing for their first Holy Communion, you know, when I speak to them about why Jesus wants to come into us, I ask them, do you ever give your mom or dad a hug? And they say, oh yeah. And I say, do you ever give them like a really big hug and squeeze them really, really tight? And they say, yes. And the reason we do that is because we really love our parents. And we want to be really close to them, as close as we possibly can be. But you see, when it comes to the Eucharist, it's God embracing us. And he enters into the very depths of our being, into our soul. You cannot get any closer. Now, we don't feel that embrace because it's a spiritual embrace, but we do receive God himself into us. It strengthens our union with him, and he gives us his life. He gives us his love. He wants to be there to give us his strength, to help us in times of difficulty, and also to motivate us to do good. So this is why he comes to us, but he gives himself to us. This is the greatest gift. I believe it was Bishop Fulton Sheen who said the greatest love story is contained in a tiny host, the Eucharist. It's the greatest love story. Because you see, Jesus, in wanting to give himself to us, he didn't just love his disciples. He loves everyone that he created. He wants everyone to receive him in Holy Communion. And to make this possible on this very night at the Last Supper, he didn't just institute the Eucharist. He also ordained his apostles to become priests, to be able to do what he did, to make Jesus truly present under the appearance of bread and wine, so that they could give it to others also, and their successors, and to the priests today, so that Jesus can come to every one of us. And also that we can adore him when he is present in our churches, in our tabernacles, so that we can feel close to him, that we can focus on him, that we can worship him. And, it's interesting, in today's first reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, St. Paul says, "Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So in other words, when you do this, what he just did, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. In other words, our Lord didn't just say to do this so that you'll remember me. He told them to do this so that he can become present to everyone. But there's another reason, and it's contained here in this passage, that you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And the key to understanding this is actually in today's first reading from the book of Exodus. So it's really talking about the Passover and what the Jewish people were required to do. For the Passover, they had to kill this male, unblemished young lamb, and to put the blood on the doorpost and to roast it and to consume the lamb in its entirety. And if they made this sacrifice of the lamb, of the spotless lamb, which foreshadows Christ, then the angel of death would pass over their homes. But you see, and they would be freed from their slavery to the Egyptians, and they would be enabled to cross into the promised land. So this unspotted lamb symbolized Christ and foreshadowed Christ. So Christ at the Last Supper, he fulfills this foreshadowing. He is the true lamb. He is the unspotted lamb. In other words, he is without sin. He is the one who is sacrificed. And we must consume him in his entirety so that we might be spared our slavery to sin and, our imprisonment and, to the evil spirits, their influence over us, and possibly ending up in hell, so that we can cross over to our promised land, which is in heaven. And so when our Lord institutes the Eucharist, it's really an anticipation of his crucifixion. And in fact, the 3 days that we refer to as the Triduum, the three main events, Holy Thursday, the Last Supper, and then Good Friday, and then the Easter Vigil or Easter Sunday, the resurrection of our Lord. All of these three are contained in every Mass. And in fact, every Mass is primarily and first and foremost the crucifixion. In other words, the fruit of the crucifixion is the Eucharist. So when our Lord instituted the Eucharist, it was in anticipation of his crucifixion. And if you recall, when the Jewish people, when they offered a sacrifice, well, they first had to kill the animal, such as the unblemished lamb, and only after that could they consume it. But our Lord instituted the Eucharist beforehand because he was going to undergo his passion in a very short time after the Last Supper. So all these three elements are contained. So what I mentioned earlier about the foot washing, that it's only a small kind of manifestation of our Lord's self-giving. His real self-giving is manifested in his crucifixion. So on our altars, when the priest consecrates the bread, the body of our Lord becomes present, but it's his living body, so all of him is there, body, blood, soul, and divinity. When he consecrates the wine, our Lord's blood becomes present, but all of him is present there. body, blood, soul, and divinity. But the symbolism of the separation of the solid bread and the liquid wine or the blood not just symbolizes, but actually makes present the crucifixion. So we proclaim the crucifixion at every Mass, every time we celebrate the Mass. It's very important that we understand this. In other words, if we want to benefit by our participation in the Mass, we need to understand that it's the crucifixion. It's not just the Last Supper. It's not just our Lord giving himself to us in the Eucharist. It's our Lord crucified, being present to us here and now on our altars so that we can participate in that great sacrifice and receive the merits, the benefits from that crucifixion. And all graces flow from that crucifixion. I will now ask the 12 men symbolizing or representing the 12 apostles to please come forward, and I will wash your feet.